Well, welcome back to the UpLevel Podcast, listeners, and welcome, Eva. Thank you so much for saying yes to this conversation.
Thank you for inviting me, Christy. Very happy to be here.
Well, I first met you when I was completing the season of Leading Through Crisis, Chaos, and Change. And I thought, oh my, this human, I need to talk to her about how we navigate these times because you are in it and you are bringing such powerful tools and ways of being to folks globally and also in such interesting contexts. So we're doing a second season and here you are. So I'm happy to have you. And let's just start with there. Yeah, tell our listeners a little bit about what you're up to and like the why behind it for you.
All right. So I'm right now I'm up to activating peace in Palestine, Israel. When I say that, people are like, "Whoa!" But yeah, it's possible. It's attainable. It's feasible, and I'm on a mission to do it with many other people. The organization I founded after in October 2023 is called Peace Activation, and I believe in activating peace within, so that we can act in the outside in the world from a place of center in the midst of chaos and division and uncertainty, which is exactly what we're still in. I mean, it's hard to believe that we've been like a year into this, whatever you want to call it, crisis, genocide, war, conflict situation, depending on which side you're on, you're going to call it a certain word. And I find that people get attached to the word and not to the actual what's happening. So I'm okay with whatever you want to call it, as long as we address it. And that's what peace activation is all about. Peace activation is really targeting individuals that are immersed in this situation and are supporting them in finding peace inside of them so that they can activate it in their community. So this concretely means that we're speaking with youth and adults in Palestine and in Israel. We're inviting citizens of both countries to come and share the truth. And we do that on a regular basis since October. Every week on Friday, 6 p.m. Jerusalem time, we have Palestinian, Israeli, international, anybody that has any connection to Palestine and Israel that is triggered, annoyed, has an opinion on what's going on, to come and share from their heart. And we invite people not to respond to each other. So this is a safe space where each person gets to share their truth and not to respond to the other. And I hold this container very, very tightly because it's really important for me and for us in general in peace activation is that people get to share their narrative regardless of who's in the room, and that they are heard on their narrative, whether or not we agree on the narrative. So that's kind of in a nutshell what we're up to.
Thank you for your work. This is such a potent time for your specific wisdom and the way you're bringing people together. And what you're speaking about, the way you're doing it, I think is applicable to any group in these times, because whether we're speaking about the crisis in the Middle East or just navigating day by day, the world has exponentially over the past 4.5 years given us ample opportunity to create these environments where how can we give people an opportunity to share what they need to share without reacting, responding, jumping in, cutting them off. So can you help us understand some of the ways that you guide people so that folks learning could embody that, like in their boardroom, in their team meetings, in their homes?
Mm-hmm. So I call peace activation compassion in action. And I really emphasize on the action because we have compassion. A lot of people have compassion, but actually in the moment of heat, and we call it the moment of fever, we're like, fuck compassion, I am mad, I'm angry, I'm upset because you, etc., etc.
Yes.
And so for me, compassion is action. It's all about, can I activate in that moment of trigger? Can I find this place inside my heart to hold myself before I hold anybody else? Just holding myself in compassion and hold myself in peace, staying in the center, breathe into that trigger and keep silent. And silence is really key. And if you participate in some of our session on the Fridays gathering, there's a lot of silence. There's silence in between the shares, just to sit in silence in a group rather than fill in the blank by responding, reacting, commenting, and saying, "Oh my God, that's exactly how I feel," or "This happened to me and this happened to I don't know who." It's like, no, let's sit in silence. And suddenly in this silence, there's a space in between the share that is created where I hear what's happening inside of me and the part of me that I haven't listened to. And that's why I'm upset. I'm upset because there's something inside of me that I haven't addressed. And I'm riding the wave of Gaza so that I can channel this anger, this frustration, this annoyance on something else outside, so I don't need to take responsibility for what I'm creating in this reality.
So part of peace activation is to help people remember that we're mirrors to the external world, and that if we can get silent and still enough and go within, we can start to see how we might be contributing to what's happening outside of us. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, that's a fair assessment. And I would just add, I would emphasize on the presence, like what we invite people to be present with whatever is happening and not react or respond. So I'm present to my emotions. And we really believe we make a distinction between feelings and emotions. And we all have feelings that are valid, except that sometimes because we hold on to them, we don't allow the energy to move. And that's where emotions is energy in motion, and it's energy that got stuck in our bodies. And because we're all basically traumatized, and rather than deal with the present, we're constantly dealing with the past. And we're constantly referring to what's happened yesterday, the day before, last year, 10 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years, it doesn't matter when, but we're referring to the past. And each side have their own reference to which past we're referring to. So for us as Palestinian, it would be 1948 or even before the Nakba. For the Israeli, it would be October 7. But when you speak to Palestinians, like October 7, there's like 75 years of occupation beforehand. Why are you starting in October 7? What happened before? Well, what happened in October 7, it brought the conflict to the living room of the Israeli. And they woke up to the fact that they've been occupying the land of other people. And so there's a lot of narrative around that. And for me, it's okay not to agree with me on my narrative. That's the key. Mm-hmm. This is my narrative, and it's valid because it's my story. Now, I need to work around how to let go of that story. You don't need to tell me how to let go of that story, because the more you're going to coach me, advise me, tell me what to do with my story, the more I'm going to hold on to my story and justify my existence. Yeah. And for me, the core issue in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is really the narrative, the fight over narrative, the comparison of suffering. There's kind of a competition of who's suffering more. Okay. And justifying what's happening right now, for me, that's like what I have a hard time accepting. It's like, how can I justify what's happening now as an Israeli by October 7? Like, can you see the history of what's happening? And can we stop for a moment and remove the narrative and the story and the programming that we have and really be present and accept that we're embracing difficult emotions right now and different perspective. And it's not either or. You know, it's not either or. And I think that's where I nailed peace activation. It's with the sentence of Rumi, out there beyond right doing and wrongdoing, there's a field, I'll meet you there. So come meet me in that field where I'm not wrong, but you're not right. And so how is that possible?
How is that possible? And to me, that's how we can navigate crisis, chaos, on change. For so long, and ongoingly is what you're speaking about. It's the reminder that this is another Rumi quote. We're all just walking each other home.
Yes.
And there's people who are listening who are going to say, "Oh, that might sound a little too fluffy or a little too like it's not attainable when you think about the horrendous acts that have happened. What do you say to folks who say, like, it's not about sitting and listening and, being in circles, it's about fighting and defending and retaliation? Like, how do you navigate that as a leader in this conversation?
I hear them. I don't argue with them. I don't argue with this narrative. This is their point of view and it's valid. And I think that's what we need to understand, that there's no one way to peace. Peace is the way. It's the way I am going to be with those people that disagree with me, that are triggered with me, or that I trigger, or that I'm triggered. That's the way. It's my way of being that would make the shift. And I've seen it. I've seen it so multiple times, whether it's in my physical session, like in-person session here in Costa Rica or in Israel or in Palestine, or even online session where people are triggered and they're like, this is bullshit. What are you talking about? Inner peace? There are people that are dying. What are you talking about? Like, stop this bullshit.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I hear you. Yeah. Let's stop this bullshit. And what do you want to do? Tell me more. Tell me more about what's the upset, what's the frustration, and what's your story that nobody ever heard, that nobody ever, took the time to listen until the end. And I find that as Palestinian, I've never claimed my Palestinianhood so much as since October. Since October, I'm Palestinian. I'm not citizen of the world. I'm Palestinian, actually. You see all this modern looking citizen of the world person. I'm actually Palestinian. And yes, there are Palestinians that look like me. I'm not like exceptional. And for me as a Palestinian to hear a Jewish person talk about their trauma and have them listen to my trauma because of the way I look and because I was able to hear them, that shift, because many Israeli and many Jewish people have never actually met a Palestinian, have never actually heard the narrative of Palestinian. Their defense mechanism is so high up on, I need to protect my Zionism, my Jewism, my Judaism, my Israelism. Like, I need to protect myself to defend, to justify the fact that I have the right to exist. And I'm like, yeah, you have the right to exist. That doesn't give you the right to eliminate me.
Right there.
That give you the right. I give you the right to exist. Why does it have to come at my expense of existing? Yeah. Like, why does it have to be either or? And yes, there was the Holocaust. And guess what? It's never again. It wasn't never again for the Jewish people. It was never again any Holocaust. It was never again any genocide. And right now, what we're witnessing is the ethnic cleansing, genocide, whatever term you want to use it, where there's a huge amount of Palestinians, including my own family in Gaza, that have died, are still dying, and nobody is doing anything about it. And that's the shame for humanity. Like, how can we now still be talking about justification of what's happening in Gaza on the basis of October 7, or on the basis of Israel's right for self-defense, or on the basis of Hamas is a terrorist organization, or whatever basis? Like, seriously? Wake up, humanity, where are you? And so for me, it's really like, when people are triggered, I go with them in the trigger. I'm triggered as well. Yeah. That's not an excuse for me to kill you or to kill someone else or to deny your narrative or deny your existence. We are all radically different. And as such, we have different narrative. That doesn't mean that you get to exist and I don't. That means that you get to exist in your own difference, and I get to exist in my own difference. That's all.
I'm just taking a moment, sitting in silence. So what you shared is so powerful. And so your lived experience. And you grew up in Israel as a Palestinian person. What was that like?
Very interesting. It's the way Israel referred to us is Arab Israeli, and I never really understood it until I went outside of Israel. And so in Israel is it's really divide and rule. So within the Israeli citizen, you have the high citizen, which is the Jewish Israeli. Then you have Druze, Bedouin, Muslim, Christian, Cherkassi, and different sects. And so all of these are like under Arab Israeli, to deny the fact that they're Palestinian, to deny the fact that there was a land called Palestine and they were citizens of this land. that wasn't acknowledged, that was under the British mandate. And so for me, I was referring to myself as Arab Israeli until I left Israel at the age of 19. And when I met actually in Strasbourg, a huge Jewish community that referred to me, that thought that I was Jewish. And I said, no, I'm Muslim. And they're like, oh, but you're like Israeli. How can you be like Israeli and Muslim? And like, oh, because there's a variety of us there. And that's when I started learning about like really an identity crisis. And so for me, as Palestinian growing up in Israel without this political connotation to Palestine, because I have family in Gaza, in Nablus, in Hebron, and we would go and visit them. It just that it didn't connect the dot for me as Arab Israeli and my family as Palestinian. Like we're the same family. Like if they're Palestinian, then I'm Palestinian too. If I'm Arab, they're Arab too. And so it's just like the breakdown of like Palestinian, Arab, Muslim. So based on where you're going to put your identity, your national identity, is it on the religion? Is it on the culture? Where would you put yourself? And since then, I would say for the past 30 years, it's been a surge of like, what does it mean to be Palestinian? You know, what's the common cultural, but also what does it mean to be Israeli? Because when I meet Israeli outside of Israel, there's many things in common that we have, including the language, because I do speak Hebrew. And even though I went through a period where I was refusing to speak that language, I find it's just like another language, an extra. I have 5 languages that I speak. This one is an addition. So I feel it as enriching. But the narrative, the meaning that we put around the identity is what breaks or builds in a way.
Well, let's look at that a little bit more because there's been a real emphasis on identity, specifically in the West and more so in North America. How do you see that supporting or not supporting peace activation and helping people lead through crisis, chaos, and change?
So for me, peace activation, we target individuals and on purpose because we really want to target the silent majority. I call it the silent majority, the 95% that want to live in peace and harmony and don't really care about the higher, like the war that's going on or the battle on right and wrong. At the same time, allowing my identity as Palestinian to come forward and your identity as Jewish to come forward or you as Israeli to come forward without it causing a conflict is very powerful. Why? Because I can rest on my other identities that me living in Costa Rica, citizen of the world, traveling around, there's so many different identities. And the one that I will choose to put forward will be the one that will have the focus. And so I host here in Costa Rica in my home a peace activation circle with Jewish Israeli that are also living in Costa Rica. And we come together around the language because we all speak Hebrew. And my peace activation circle online are all in English. And then I have other peace activation circle in Arabic. And so in each of these circles, I will put forward a different identity. And for me, that's the richness of my identities. I don't want to be blocked in one identity and just get stuck in that and fight for it. I don't need to fight to any of my identities. All my identities are what makes me a person, be it Muslim, Palestinian, Israeli citizen, resident in Costa Rica, French speaking, Francophone, whatever that is, that a mother, a wife, a partner, a hippie, whatever you want to put forward. Would be the one that I would, depending on the context. And I think that's where perceiving identity as flexibility in my way of being, then that would be what I would define as identity. Your identity is your ability to be flexible in which way of being you want to put forward, rather than be stuck in one or the other.
I think that's brilliant, and I think it's gotten a little bit lost, that piece that our identity, it's like a vehicle for connection. Like that's what I hear you saying. It's like what part of my identity will most serve this person in front of me, this conversation, this project, versus getting very stuck and rigid in this is my identity. So I love that. I think it takes us back to we are multidimensional beings.
Absolutely.
And when I think about leading through crisis, chaos, and change, it feels like that's so important to remember. We are multidimensional and we have an ability to, like you said, be flexible, be agile. And that's going to help us navigate these times.
And I want to add to this service. What would serve the situation? I'm really guided by service. Like Seva is a core value of mine. And I'm sure you relate to it as well, just like by our background in spiritual psychology. I feel like rather than what I want to prove to you, I want to know, how can I serve you? What part of my identity would serve the situation to bring it more peace and harmony and, love, rather than what part of my identity I need to fight so that you can see me and I'm going to prove you wrong because I haven't been heard or I haven't been seen or I haven't been acknowledged enough. And so for me, our peace activation is actually, I want to acknowledge you. I want to see you. I want to hear your story. I don't want to necessarily agree with your story, but I want to hear you. And it goes back to, the French philosopher, let's say, I'm against anything that you say, but I'll make everything so that you can say it. But again, we'll come back. Anyway, it's really, it's Voltaire.
Voltaire.
Voltaire's like that, yeah. Je suis contre tout ce que vous dites, mais je ferai tout pour que vous le dites. And this is really important. Like, I'm against, it's the principle of tolerance. I don't need to agree with it, but I want you to say what you have to say. I want to hear your narrative. And then I want you to hear my narrative. And just there, this heart-centered listening is key in dissolving conflict. Really, I've seen it. I've seen it in various conflict zones. I worked in more than 22 conflict zones around the world, in Africa, Southeast Asia, the Middle East. So I'm coming to Palestine, Israel's context with all this background that gave me the tools, the skills, the support that I need to be able to apply it now in my own country. Because up until October, I haven't actually worked on the conflict in Palestine, Israel. This is really new territory where I'm like, okay, now I'm ready. Because most of my life I was triggered by the conflict, and I would just cry for the injustice and what's happening for my family and for other people's family and for our land and what we had and that we lost, including, the identity. And it was actually when I did spiritual psychology 12 years ago that my teacher and your teacher, Dr. Ron Holtnick, said, Eva, you have to activate peace inside of you. If you don't activate peace inside of you, you will never be able to really be a peace. You call yourself peace activist, but you need to become a peace activator. And that's what I bring to peace activation. It's like, how can we teach people to activate peace inside of them? And that bring together conflict transformation skills, as well as spiritual psychology principle, together with nonlinear leadership. And that's kind of the cocktail that we're offering the world in, like, okay, here's a methodology that you can try on yourself. And we've tried it. I mean, I tried it. This is what I live in. This is like what have been my practice for the past 30 years. Join me on this journey.
What's nonlinear leadership?
Nonlinear leadership was coined by an Austrian teacher. I forgot his name. We have him on the website, but I do it with Sami Awad from Nonviolence International. And basically it's coining the fact that we're constantly either in the past or in the present, and we're rarely in the present. In the past or the future, and we're rarely in the present. And so coming into the present, we need to be conscious of what it is that we have, the dialogue that we have inside our head, and we call the inherent house of being, about the situation. And so how can we bring all of ourselves into the present so that the action that we want to take will lead us to the result that we want to achieve, but from the present and not from the past.
Brilliant.
And this combined with spiritual psychology principle, which is heart-centered listening, compassionate self-forgiveness, asking open questions. I mean, like there's various skills in both spiritual psychology and conflict transformation. And I would say spiritual the nonlinear leadership add a layer of presence into it.
What are some ways for people to access presence?
Silence, we spoke about that.
Mm-hmm.
Breath, just like taking deep breaths. We can try that now.
Mm.
It's just the breath is the first thing we do when we're born and the last thing we do when we die,
Mm.
before dying. And I feel like it's the constant reminder of coming back to our body. And remember, we are bodies.
Mm-hmm.
Even if we're a spiritual being having this human experience,
Yeah.
this human experience is going through this body, and this body needs breath. And for me, breath is really one of the major tools
Mm-hmm.
for presence. Movement, when I dance, when I walk, when I swim, like this, you can't do anything else than what you're doing.
Yeah.
We lose our connection to presence when we are in our mind, in our mental, or when we are in our emotions, when we are in an emotional body. So one of the things I teach within this, I'm developing this training on trauma-informed approach. One of the key things in a trauma-informed approach is like, can we be present in our body and bring all our energies, different mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical energy to one place in the present?
Yeah.
Am I here now? And how do I feel now? Because feelings are in the present, emotions are in the past or in the future.
Mm.
And so when we understand this distinction, then we're able to bring ourselves to the present.
Mm. Powerful. And I think in any context for our listeners, stillness, breath,
Mhm.
really connecting to the feeling that is in this moment those are all great ways to activate more presence. And because what I've heard you say, the thread I'm going to pull is that part of navigating polarities, conflict, reaction, really, which is like on the daily for a lot of folks right now, is helping yourself recover to presence. How can you get to presence more quickly? And then I love this mantra. It's like, how can I serve? How can I serve? How can I serve? And really create spaces for others to share. And it does mean a practice of doing one's inner work.
Yeah.
So
And a
yeah.
focus on what needs to be done versus who does it. I feel like there's so much ego in
Mm.
some of the work that is on the ground, that if we step away from the ego, if we step away, and taking ego as the reflection of self, not
Mhm.
necessarily as something bad, but just like as a reflection. If I take myself out of the equation, what needs to be done? Is it better served by you or by me or by someone else? Like, what does the situation needs? And based on that, I can bring myself or something else or someone else. And this question, how can I serve and what needs to be done versus, I want to do it. This is my idea. This is what I want. Like I created Peace Activation because I needed it. I needed this space, safe space to explore my own crisis. And then, other people, this needed to be done for me, but also for others. And the only thing that sustains it is that it serves. If it only served me, then I don't think we will be here talking about it right now.
Right. Right. Well, and that saying, make your mess your message, right? Or I always say, make the muck your magic. And yeah, if you needed it, chances are someone else is going to benefit from it.
Mhm.
Ava, let's take the conversation up like 500,000 feet above the planet Earth,
Sure.
and for your vantage point, looking down on all of us humans in this moment in time. What do you think this is all about? Like, what is going on right now?
Freedom.
Freedom.
Freedom. What is going on right now is freedom from limiting interpretation of reality. And how am I able to take responsibility? So, freedom with responsibility of choice
Mm.
and ownership of the choices that I've taken. These are some of the tools and skills that we've learned also at USM. But for me, it's really when I go up and observe what's happening right now. We're all faced with choices and responsibility to attain our freedom to be. And this is really key because it's much more easier to get drawn into the victimhood, the drama triangle of being a victim of or a perpetrator or a savior. And that's what we're living right now. Like if I come down, this is where humanity is right now. Who's deciding, okay, who's the real victim or who's the real perpetrator? And depending on which side you are, then the other side is the victim or the perpetrator. And then the international community is supposed to be the savior, but they're not saving this. So it's really like constantly dancing around this drama triangle versus stepping out and saying, okay, we have a challenge here. How can we support? How can we create a solution that satisfies everybody? And it is possible. And so for me, it's really the freedom, the ability to be free in our choices, be responsible for our choices, and really see that life is what we make out of it. Life is not imposed. I'm not victim of my circumstances. I'm not victim of any action, actually. I'm the creator of my life. And sometimes I make really silly choices that then I have to pay consequences about it, just like any other person, or a child. And so for me, what humanity, and I would even like take it further up, I think as humanity, we are on the verge of becoming adult. Rather than like coming out of our infancy of being the child.
Teenagers.
Teenager and having our tantrum. He did it. No, he did it. And he did this and he did that. Or, coming into like adulthood of like, no, we did it. And how can we create something better for the future right now, right here, right now? And that includes all the work around gender issues, inclusivity, diversity, color. Like, how on earth can we distinguish people based on their color, sex? It just like it blows my mind. Religion, like we are one humanity. And so for me, when I launched Peace Activation, I said I really created this saying, humanity will prevail. But guess what? We are the humanity that will prevail. So unless we get our acts together, it will not prevail. We're not going to sit down here and wait for Messiah to come and prevail humanity. No, it's like we need to take action. And this action is in each individual. And so I know that it's really hard to hear that when you feel so powerless and helpless. And you feel like there's like some machine out there that is controlling this war and that is doing what it's doing. But then where's your responsibility? What is the one action that you can take that will bring your agency back to you? Because once every single person will take their power back and remember that the governments are having a contract with their citizens. And if we're not in agreement with this contract, we can break this contract. It's up to us. And so we haven't been taking our responsibilities as citizens, regardless of where we are, whether it's in Israel, in Palestine, in the US, everywhere. There's something, I don't believe in like this conspiracy theory, they're like them against us. No, there's us, and there's the part of us that we have disowned and that we need to reintegrate. There's no light without darkness, and there's no darkness without light. And unless we bring them together, the masculine and the feminine, like we cannot be living in a world that is ruled by white men. Like definitely not, regardless of who they are, whether they're Jewish, whether they're Palestinian, it doesn't matter. What matters is that we need to be ruled by the diversity of our experiences that are inhabiting us.
I love this, that what we're navigating is basically our liberation as a species.
Collective liberation.
Collective liberation. And what's happened is there's been such a caught up in, well, you get to get liberated, but you don't. And my liberation is more important than yours. But ultimately, at some level, all of us have parts of ourselves that are being oppressed, whether we're doing it to ourselves or we are oppressing, and then vice versa. So what I hear is like the peace activation and your work and your mission and your guidance to us today is we have to do the inner work so that as a collective, we all get closer to liberation and freedom.
Yeah. And I call that soul-based peace building.
Soul-based peace building. Yes.
Yeah. I'm creating a movement, and I'm inviting anybody to join a movement of soul-based peace building. And because of the type of work I have been doing for 30 years, as I said, in different countries. Like we have people from Nigeria, from Yemen, from Mali, from like Burundi, from Palestine, Israel, from Afghanistan, like from around the world that want to become peace activators. And for me, I often say, like, I want to see peace activation offices everywhere, not because of I founded it, but because the concept,
Yeah.
it's the concept. Peace activation is not even mine. It's something that Spirit gave me, that is activate peace inside of you, and you will activate peace in the world. And we can do that if we do that, like lights shining around the world, we can all come together as one because we are one. And I feel it in a concrete level, in a practical level. It's not like, like, we're one, let's sit together and chant peace loving songs. No, take action. For me, I'm very action oriented.
Yeah. So say a little bit more about it's the tangible piece. So for folks who may have a hard time, like really tracking that, what makes it tangible?
What makes it tangible is that regardless of where you are at, once you activate peace inside of you and you take action with your family, you take action with your community, you take action at your work, and you take responsibility for your triggers, and you know how to be mindful and present with your own emotion. And so you know how to manage your trigger. And so when the next time that you're in an argument with someone, you're going to step away and step back and step up maybe and say, okay, this is happening right now. I'm triggered. I'm going to leave this conversation and I'll get back to you. So we will see a reduced level of violence. And I've seen that. Once we have reduced level of violence and we see that the violence could be dissipated, then we don't need to hold on to this violence as a justification for our existence. Another example, once you feel heard, you don't need to go and put a bomb for someone to pay attention to you. I mean, like, we have all this program at the UN level, and I worked at the UN and I worked at the EU level. We have all this program against terrorism. Well, guess what? You're not tackling the root causes of this terrorism. So why don't you tackle the root causes before you define a certain act as terrorist attack? So what did you do to prevent that? Let's work on the prevention so that we don't need to come and repair. So for me, peace activation, the tangible work that we're doing is the conflict prevention. And I often say conflict prevention is victim of its own success. Because when we prevent the conflict, we don't know that there was a conflict upcoming because we prevented it.
All right.
We prevented it because we put the processes, we put the structure, we put we put something in advance so that we don't get to the conflict.
Yes.
Conflict is an opportunity. Any crisis, crisis, chaos, we see this and we're freaking out right now. I see this as a great opportunity. This is like we're cleaning up all the shit we've been building up for the last decades,
Yes.
Yes, it's chaotic. Yes, it's uncertain. Yes, it's crisis. But you know what? In Chinese, the word crisis is composed of two words, danger and opportunity. And I think it's called Wei Ji. Yeah. And I think what we've been focusing on right now is on the danger. This is so dangerous. Oh my God, what's going on? But what about if we're looking at it as an opportunity? This is our teenage child that is getting finally out of the house and into adulthood. This is humanity.
Yes, I love this. So and those are some great places like for us to start wrapping up the conversation. Like, let's look at this through the lens of opportunity. Yes, there's danger, but there's certain skills and tools that one can do to really prepare themselves to navigate these times. Eva, you've given us lots of them and very unique ones from other folks that we've talked to. Tell us about a person, a leader, or someone in your life that inspired you or that really supported you to get where you are today. You don't have to give us, like who that person is, but maybe a little bit about how they did that for you.
It's interesting because I've been reflecting on this question, and the name that came to me, the person that came to me is my father, but I didn't know that while he was living. I realized that just after his death 6 years ago. But what he taught me throughout my life is to be tolerant. My dad constantly asked to hear the other person. It constantly, when there was a conflict, and he was considered as a mediator within our community.
Mm.
And so often when people would have conflict, they would come to our house. And so we would always have people in our house coming, like couples that wanted to break up, or someone that have an issue to come to speak with my dad. And at the time I didn't understand, like, why did they come here? What did, and I didn't see anything special about what my dad was doing. He was just listening.
Yeah.
And at the time, like, oh, he's not doing anything. They're just like coming and telling all the stories, and then they go home and they don't get divorced and they get better. But he didn't do anything really. And now I'm like, oh my God, he did so much by
So
holding
much.
space.
Oh,
And I think that's what he taught me, and that's what I do. This ability to hold space, I learned it early on in my household
yeah.
by my father, and even my mother as well, in a different way. They both have been examples for me in how to be a community builder, because they were both very involved in the community, in the family, supporting a lot, very generous in their being, generous in their heart.
Mm.
And I learned, that's how I learned. I grew up this way, and I learned it from them. But then when I did my studies, I was able to articulate it. In spiritual psychology, I thought I learned it from spiritual psychology. And I'm like, oh, but actually
Ah,
it was already there. And that's the key for me. That's what I teach, is that it's already within you. I'm not teaching you anything. Actually find the way that you were brought up, or that you've been, assimilating things that you haven't yet articulate. So
yeah.
for me, it's really everything is within.
Mm.
It's all within us, and that's why it's accessible. That's why it's accessible, and we just need to activate it.
Yeah.
And that's why I emphasize the word activation.
Patient. Yeah.
Peace is here. We don't need to build it.
Mhm.
We don't need to go and straighten it. We don't need
Yeah.
anything other than activation. We need to activate peace inside of us, because it's there. It has always been there. Just like love, love is surrounding us. Love is within us. We just need to activate it. And are we able to allow it to embrace us? For me,
Beautiful.
it's allow grace and
Yeah.
love to embrace us.
And so wonderful to hear about your dad and your mom, and how they really modeled all of what you've been doing in the world. And that's super inspiring. How can people work with you and get involved in peace activation if they're called to?
So there's many ways. One is just to come to the Friday meeting to get a sense of what we do. And then we have weekly workshops that they can join. We have a core peace activation training online that they can also, all this is on the website. Just go to the website and find it. And I do one-on-one also for people who want to go deeper into understanding their own mechanism, and how they can ignite their own peace, and putting it in perspective, because I find sometimes people get lost in the perspective, and they're like, oh, this doesn't apply to me. This doesn't apply to me. I'm like, no, actually it all applies. Let me show you how. So yeah,
Mm.
everything is either on my private website, evadalak.me, or on peaceactivation.org.
Beautiful. And Eva, if you like in this moment, you've shared a lot of your prayers for humanity, but if
Mm.
you were to like synthesize one final prayer in this moment and in the context of leading through crisis, chaos, and change, what is your prayer for humanity?
Mm. My prayer for humanity is to allow grace to embrace us.
Faith,
Grace as the
peace.
feminine, the divine feminine, allowing the divine feminine within us and around us.
Mm.
I think it's really collectively activating peace within
Thank,
ourselves, around it.
thank you for this important work that you're doing in the world. I'm so glad you were born and that your father and your mother modeled what they did, and all of the years of work, like in the UN and all of these global conflict zones, and to hear how you've really taken it to serve this moment in time,
Yeah.
it is super inspiring. You are inspiring. Thank
Thank
you for
you.
contributing to this conversation and for the work you're doing in the world, Eva. We appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Yeah.
Christine. I feel honored to be at service. Really, I have. Yeah. it's something that is dear to my heart. And for me, peace activation is really the jewel that I'm coming with. Then, like, I just turned 50. And
Oh,
for me, this
happy
is my gift.
birthday.
Thank you.
Oh,
This is really my gift to humanity, to my family, to my friends, to my community. I do what I do because I really believe deeply in it. And I feel it's necessary, it's needed.
it's so needed. Your medicine is so needed. And I can't wait for folks to come to your well and learn more about you, your work, and peace activation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Christy.